The ocean above Bikini Bottom had turned the color of soft indigo silk. The light that filtered down through the water was fading now, gentle and dim, like the last stretch of evening before the stars begin to hum. Inside the Krusty Krab, the day was coming to an end. The air was still warm from the grill, smelling faintly of toasted buns, sea salt, and the faintest whisper of pickles. SpongeBob wiped the counter with slow, steady movements, the rag sliding across the smooth surface with a quiet shh rhythm. Each pass left a faint trail of shine that caught the glow from the hanging lamps above. The lights themselves swayed ever so slightly in the evening current, giving the whole restaurant a soft, drowsy motion, as if the building were breathing with the ocean outside. "Almost bedtime, buddy," SpongeBob said to the grill in a whisper. The metal still gave off a faint warmth beneath his hand, humming like an old friend. "You did great today. Lots of patties flipped. Lots of smiles made." He smiled to himself, his eyelids low, but his grin bright. From the front counter came the faint sound of coins, clink, clink, clink. Mr. Krabs was counting the day's earnings, each coin carefully stacked into neat little piles. He didn't speak, not in the way he did when customers were around. His movements were slow, thoughtful, almost gentle. Each coin caught the low golden light, sparkling like tiny suns on the countertop. Outside, through the big round windows, the sea was quiet. A few jellyfish drifted by, their translucent bodies glowing faintly with pulsing light. Their slow movement painted faint ripples of color on the Krusty Krab's walls, soft pinks and cool blues sliding like waves. Somewhere in the distance, a whale song echoed, long and low, barely more than a sigh through the water. Squidward sat near the cash register, his chin resting in one hand, eyes half closed. He tapped a lazy rhythm on the counter with the end of his clarinet, the notes silent, but the motion soothing. "Finally," he murmured, voice slow, drowsy. "Another day of flipping patties and yelling orders. Gone." SpongeBob turned toward him with a small laugh, but it came out like a whisper. "It wasn't so bad, was it, Squidward? We made a lot of happy tummies today." Squidward didn't answer right away. He looked toward the door where the faint open sign flickered weakly. "You and your never-ending cheer," he said at last. "It's almost impressive how you can still be awake." "I just love closing time," SpongeBob said softly. "Everything gets so quiet. It's like the Krusty Krab takes a deep breath and finally rests." Mr. Krabs looked up from his coin, smiling faintly. "Aye, lad. Even the Krabby Patty machine needs its beauty sleep." He chuckled, but his laugh came out warm and low. "No customer, no noise, just the sweet sound of silence and profit." The sound of the ocean outside deepened a slow rhythm like a lullaby. The soft glow from the jellyfish made the restaurant feel dreamlike. SpongeBob finished wiping the counter and looked around the room, admiring the neat rows of tables and chairs. Each table had been cleaned, each chair tucked in, every ketchup bottle aligned just right. The Krusty Krab had never looked so peaceful. He walked to the window, pressing his hand lightly against the glass. Tiny bubbles drifted upward on the other side, catching the last rays of twilight. He imagined they were stars rising slowly into the night. Behind him, Squidward leaned back on his stool, letting out a long, contented sigh. "Maybe," he said quietly, "maybe it's not so bad. The quiet, I mean." SpongeBob turned, his square face glowing in the dim light. "It's nice, huh? The way everything slows down." "Yeah," Squidward admitted. "It's like the ocean's telling us to stop for a while." The sound of the door creaked as the last gust of current drifted through. The open sign flickered once more and faded out completely. its light turning from warm red to deep blue. SpongeBob watched it dim, and the faint glow made his eyes sparkle. "That's it," he said softly. "Close for the night." Mr. Krabs gave a slow nod, scooping his last pile of coins into a small chest. The soft clunk of the lid closing was the final sound of the day's business. He turned the key gently, as if tucking the chest into bed. "Good work today, boys," he said, voice quiet and almost tender. "Another fine day of frying and serving in the books." SpongeBob straightened proudly. "Aye, aye, Mr. Krabs," he said, but his voice was low, nearly a whisper. Even he couldn't bring himself to disturb the calm that had settled over the restaurant. He looked toward the grill one last time. The metal surface reflected the dim lights like a calm pond. SpongeBob could almost imagine it sighing in relief a long exhale after a long, busy day. He walked over and gently draped a towel across it, the same way someone might pull a blanket over a sleeping friend. "There you go, Grill," he whispered. "Sweet dreams." From the corner, Squidward snorted softly. "You're talking to a piece of metal again." "Shh," SpongeBob said, holding a finger to his lips. "He's tired." Squidward rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Even he felt it, that strange, peaceful stillness that filled the Krusty Krab after hours. The quiet hum of the ocean, the gentle sway of the water outside, the faint creak of the building settling against the current. It was all part of the rhythm of the night. SpongeBob stood in the center of the room for a long moment, his eyes slowly closing. The light flickered across his face, warm and soft. He could hear every tiny sound, the slow drip from the sink, the tick of the wall clock, the faint murmur of Mr. Krabs humming to himself as he put the register to sleep. Everything was winding down, one heartbeat at a time. The slow ticking of the wall clock echoed through the restaurant, soft and hollow, like a heartbeat trapped in a seashell. SpongeBob listened to it as he swept the floor, letting the rhythm of the broom match the gentle beat swish, tick, swish, tick. The floorboards creaked faintly beneath his feet, the sound comforting, familiar. Every step he took seemed to hum a lullaby only the Krusty Krab could hear. He stopped by table 3, the one near the window where the sun always touched first in the morning. There was a faint ring of salt left from someone's soda glass, and SpongeBob carefully wiped it away with his rag. The table gleamed afterward, polished so smooth it reflected the lantern light above like liquid gold. "Good night, table 3, SpongeBob murmured softly. "You served a lot of smiles today." He made his way down the line of booths, touching each one with the same gentle care. "Good night, ketchup bottles. Good night, napkin holders. Good night, little crumbs hiding under the seat. I see you." He brushed them away with a happy sigh. From behind the counter, Mr. Krabs peeked out, one claw still resting on his coin chest. "You talk to the furniture now, lad?" he said in a quiet chuckle. SpongeBob grinned without turning. "It helps them rest easy, Mr. Krabs. Everything in the Krusty Krab deserves a bedtime story." Mr. Krab's eyes softened a little, though he'd never admit it. "I can't argue with that. She's been working hard today." He patted the nearest wall affectionately. The wood felt warm under his claw, still carrying the heat from a busy day of frying and footsteps. Outside, the water had gone deep blue. Tiny specks of glowing plankton floated in lazy clouds, drifting like snow. They lit up the edges of the restaurant in faint trails of light, wrapping the Krusty Krab in a sleepy underwater halo. Squidward sighed again from the front, his eyelids now so low they barely stayed open. He tapped the counter with one tentacle, listening to the faint echoes. "Do you ever notice," he said slowly, "how quiet this place gets after everyone leaves? It's almost eerie." SpongeBob paused his sweeping, leaning on the broom with a thoughtful smile. "Not eerie," he said softly. "Peaceful. It's like the Krusty Krab's taking a nap." He looked around the chairs lined up neatly, the sign dark, the grill asleep. The smell of cooking faded into a soft, buttery memory. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady and calm. Squidward yawned, rubbing his eyes. "If the Krusty Krab's asleep, then I guess that makes me the world's sleepiest cashier." SpongeBob laughed quietly. "You always say that, Squidward, but I think you like this time, too." Squidward tilted his head, pretending to think. Maybe. It's the only time you're not talking nonstop about patties." SpongeBob smiled, but didn't argue. He just went back to sweeping, slower now, the broom gliding softly over the wooden floor. Each sweep seemed to carry away a bit more of the day, the noise, the rush, the clatter, until only calm remained. From the kitchen, the faint sound of dripping water filled the air. Pling, bling, bling. It was rhythmic, gentle, like a metronome keeping time with the ocean's pulse. SpongeBob didn't hurry to stop it. It was part of the quiet music of closing time. Mr. Krabs finished locking his register and walked slowly toward the door. His heavy steps were muffled by the sand-coated mat beneath him. He flipped the final switch on the wall, and the bright lights dimmed into a soft, amber glow. The restaurant seemed to sigh in gratitude. "There we go," he said softly. "Nice and cozy. She's all ready for the night." SpongeBob nodded, watching the golden light fade into the shadows. The shapes of the tables blurred softly, edges melting into the dim glow. The Krusty Krab looked almost like a painting, gentle strokes of light and shadow, alive but still. He put the broom away, placing it carefully against the corner by the grill. Then he walked over to the window again. Outside, the water shimmered faintly under the glow of the coral moon. The surface above caught the last hint of light from the world above the sea, a slow-moving glow that looked like the sky breathing. SpongeBob pressed his forehead lightly against the glass. "Everyone must be asleep by now," he whispered. "Even the jellyfish." One drifted by as if answering him, its body glowing faintly pink and blue. It floated upward in lazy spirals, leaving a soft trail of bubbles behind. SpongeBob smiled, his eyes half closed. Mr. Krabs turned the closed sign one last time, the hinge creaking softly. The words faced the sea now, where no one could see them but the drifting fish and the current. He took one slow look around the restaurant. Every corner was quiet. The Krabby Patty posters on the walls fluttered slightly in the faint water movement. The sound of Squidward's gentle breathing, SpongeBob's soft hums, and the distant lull of the sea blended together into something soothing, something that felt like home. Mr. Krabs rubbed his tired eyes. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Every night feels the same, but it never gets old." SpongeBob turned, curious. "What do you mean, Mr. Krabs?" Mr. Krabs smiled faintly. "That moment when the day ends? When the customers are gone and all that's left is us and the ocean, it's peaceful. Reminds me of the first night I ever locked this place up." He laughed softly under his breath, eyes distant with memory. "Didn't even have a sign then. Just me, a few patties, and an old stove that squeaked every time I turned it on. Never thought she'd last this long." SpongeBob's voice was barely a whisper. "She'll last forever, Mr. Krabs." The old crab smiled, eyes glinting in the dim light. "Aye, lad, maybe she will." The Krusty Krab felt like a shell resting at the bottom of the sea, still, safe, and surrounded by the slow rhythm of the tide. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft swish of the current outside filled the quiet. SpongeBob took a step toward the back wall. where the framed photo of the first Krabby Patty hung. The picture was old and faded, the colors washed out by time, but the memory inside it still glowed warm. He wiped the frame carefully with his sleeve, smiling at the smiling face of a much younger Mr. Krabs beside his first stack of patties. "You've been making people happy for a long time," SpongeBob whispered to the photo, "and you're still the best." Behind him, Squidward yawned again, the sound long and slow, like a sleepy whale call. He leaned back on his stool and looked at SpongeBob through half-lidded eyes. "You really talk to everything in here, don't you?" SpongeBob giggled softly. "Only the important things." Squidward shook his head, but smiled despite himself. The faint light from the lantern reflected in his tired eyes, turning them a calm sea green. "Well," he murmured, "I guess it's not the worst bedtime routine." Mr. Krabs finished turning off the last of the neon lights. The only glow now came from the old wall lamps, casting golden ripples across the floor. The shadows danced gently with the motion of the ocean outside, moving slowly across the wooden planks like drifting seaweed. He shuffled toward the door, locked it with a quiet click, then turned back to his two employees. "All right, boys," he said softly. "That's all for the day. Let's keep it peaceful-like, eh? Don't want to wake the sea." SpongeBob nodded solemnly, as if Mr. Krabs had just shared an ancient secret. "Yes, sir. The sea's asleep, too." He walked around the tables one more time, his steps light and careful, almost floating. Each sound in the room seemed magnified by the stillness, the faint brush of his shoes against the floor, the tiny pop of a bubble escaping from the mop bucket, the quiet crackle of a lantern wick burning low. Outside, a school of glowing fish drifted past the windows, each one shimmering softly like a floating candle. Their slow, rhythmic movement painted the walls in soft, blue light. SpongeBob watched them go, his breath fogging the glass slightly. He drew a tiny heart with his fingertip, then wiped it away, smiling. The scent of the day's cooking had faded into something gentler now, not the sharp smell of oil and salt, but a lingering warmth of bread, butter, and faint sweetness from the buns. It was the scent of memories, of things well done. Squidward had set his clarinet down on the counter beside him. He ran a tentacle along its smooth surface, the way someone might pet a sleepy cat. "You know," he said quietly, "it's not all bad here when it's like this." SpongeBob turned, eyes curious. "What do you mean?" Squidward shrugged, his voice lazy. "When it's quiet, no customers, no shouting, no—" He paused, smirking faintly. "Enthusiastic fry cooks bouncing around the grill." SpongeBob giggled softly. "You mean me?" "Exactly," Squidward said, smiling without his usual sarcasm. "You're quieter at night. It's nice." SpongeBob looked at the floor, blushing a little. "The Krusty Krab feels different when it's sleeping, like it's telling us stories." Squidward tilted his head, interested despite himself. "Stories?" "Mm-hmm." SpongeBob nodded, walking toward the grill. He placed his hand gently on the edge. "If you listen closely, you can hear them. The stories of every Krabby Patty ever made, every laugh, every sound of the spatula hitting the grill, they all stay here." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of those invisible echoes SpongeBob spoke of. The faint memory of sizzling patties, customers laughing, the ding of the order bell. It was as though the air still carried the warmth of the day, tucked gently into its folds. Mr. Krabs stood near the office door, listening, in his own quiet way. He didn't say anything for a moment, but when he did, his voice was low and rough, with something softer than usual. "You're not wrong, lad. The Krusty Krab's seen more stories than I can count. Every one of them worth keeping. He ran a claw along the wall as he passed, tracing the tiny dents and marks left behind over the years. These here scratches? That was from the Great Anchovy Rush. Nearly lost the register that day. He chuckled quietly. And that stain on the wall, it's from the time I tried to fry patties myself when you called in sick. SpongeBob gasped softly. You used the grill without me? Mr. Krabs smiled. Aye, and burned half the batch. The smell lasted a week. Squidward snorted with a sleepy laugh, shaking his head. Now that's a story I'd like to forget. The laughter, soft, tired, genuine, filled the Krusty Krab for a moment. It echoed faintly off the walls, not loud enough to disturb the peace, but enough to warm the space like a flickering lantern. When it faded, they all stood quietly for a while. SpongeBob leaned against the table, Squidward sat still with his clarinet, and Mr. Krabs looked toward the dark window where the glow of the sea shimmered faintly. It was a rare moment, one where none of them felt like workers or bosses or co-workers, just three souls under the same soft sea, listening to the heartbeat of the place that brought them together. The Krusty Krab seemed to breathe now in long, slow motions as the water outside rolled gently against its walls. Each wave that brushed past the windows made the lantern light flicker like the steady rise and fall of someone asleep. SpongeBob stood in the center of the room and closed his eyes. He could feel the faint vibration of the ocean. Through the floorboards, the deep, endless pulse that tied everything in Bikini Bottom together. It sounded like the sea whispering, "Rest now, rest now." He took one last walk through the restaurant, his square shoes making soft thumps against the wood. Every sound was magnified in the silence. The faint creak of a chair leg, the slow drip from the faucet, the almost inaudible rustle of the closed sign outside as the current moved by. He peeked into the kitchen. The metal shelves gleamed faintly in the dim light. The spatulas were hanging in a perfect row, each one reflecting the tiny flame from the stove's pilot light. SpongeBob smiled. "Good night, spatulas," he said softly. "You did a great job today." He ran a gentle hand across the counter, feeling the smooth, cool surface. The smell of the day lingered there, oil, butter, sea salt, and something sweet that he couldn't quite name. It was the smell of hard work and happiness, and now it was fading into something peaceful and clean. Behind him, Squidward had stopped fighting his drowsiness. He leaned his head on the counter, arms folded like a pillow. The faintest snore slipped from his nose, high and soft, almost musical. It blended perfectly with the hum of the refrigerator, a lazy duet for the end of the day. Mr. Krabs was still at his desk in the small office, though his eyes had closed halfway through, writing something in his ledger. The quill drooped from his claw, and the ink on the page bled slightly in the still water. His mouth twitched into a small smile, maybe dreaming of coins dancing in the current. SpongeBob looked toward the door of the office, the faint glow of the lantern inside painting warm lines across the floor. He felt a wave of fondness. Even Mr. Krabs needs rest, he thought. He turned back to the main room and began lowering the lamps one by one. Each flame dimmed to a soft golden bead before fading completely. The restaurant grew darker, but not in a lonely way. It was a gentle dark, filled with warmth and memory. One lamp by the window stayed lit, casting light across the sign that read, "Home of the Krabby Patty." The letters shimmered faintly, their edges wavy in the shifting current. SpongeBob stood by that light, hands folded behind his back, watching the shadows stretch and melt into the corners. His breathing matched the rhythm of the sea outside, in, out, until he couldn't tell which was his and which belonged to the ocean. A single bubble escaped from somewhere under a table and floated up lazily toward the ceiling. It caught the lamplight as it rose, glowing soft yellow before popping with a tiny plink. SpongeBob watched it disappear and smiled. "Good night, Bubble," he whispered. He pulled a small cloth from his pocket and gently covered the register bell, a habit he'd started years ago so that it wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night. The cloth muffled the faint ring it made when he touched it, leaving only a quiet hum. From the ceiling, the sound of a distant wail echoed again, slow, deep, and steady. The kind of sound that seemed to come from the heart of the ocean itself. It filled the Krusty Krab completely, vibrating softly through the tables, the chairs, the walls, and through SpongeBob's chest. He exhaled, his eyes heavy. The sound made him think of home, of his pineapple house, of Gary curled up in his shell, of the way the reef outside his window always swayed like it was dreaming too. He looked around one last time. Every chair was tucked in neatly. Every light except the one by the window was out. Even the tiny bubbles that usually clung to the ceiling had floated away, as though they too were going to sleep. SpongeBob took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the calm, salty air. "Good night, Krusty Krab," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've done enough for today." He turned off the last lamp. The room fell into the soft blue glow of the ocean, shadows drifting across the walls like slow clouds. For a moment, everything was still perfectly, completely still. Then a small creak came from the door, and the ocean's current brushed gently through the cracks, carrying with it the scent of coral and distant kelp. It swept through the restaurant and out again, like a final good-night kiss from the sea. SpongeBob stood in the quiet, his eyes closed, feeling the coolness of the current on his face. The world outside had slowed almost to nothing. The jellyfish were sleeping. The seagrass bent low, swaying softly. The stars above the waterline shimmered through the surface, their light faint but steady. And deep in the heart of Bikini Bottom, the Krusty Krab slept too. Its walls no longer echoed with orders or laughter or sizzling grease, only with dreams. Dreams of busy days, of familiar voices, of golden patties stacked high under a shining sign. Dreams that would wait patiently until morning, when the first light of the sea would wake them again. SpongeBob smiled one last time and whispered into the dimness, "See you tomorrow." The words drifted through the restaurant, soft as a bubble, and were swallowed gently by the water. Outside, the current slowed. The glow of plankton faded. The ocean exhaled, long and deep. And inside the Krusty Krab, peace finally settled, thick, warm, and endless, wrapping every corner of the restaurant in the quiet comfort of sleep. The Krusty Krab was asleep, but SpongeBob wasn't. Not yet. The restaurant's lights had dimmed into a soft blue haze, and the glow from the coral moon filtered gently through the windows. It painted quiet ribbons across the floor, pale streaks that shimmered like silver cloth every time the current shifted. The air was cool now, touched with the faint scent of salt and bread. SpongeBob stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding his mop like a companion on a nighttime stroll. "One last clean," he whispered, his voice so light it barely stirred the air. The handle creaked softly in his hands as he dipped the mop into the bucket. The water shimmered, catching the lantern's glow before rippling away into stillness. The first stroke across the floor made a gentle sound, swish, shh, swish, and then again slower, steadier, until it matched the rhythm of the tide outside. The floor gleamed behind him with each pass, reflecting tiny points of light from the jellyfish floating by the window. He hummed as he worked, a tune only he seemed to know slow and low, like a lullaby made of bubbles. The melody wound its way through the kitchen, bouncing softly off the walls, mixing with the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the sign outside. Every corner of the Krusty Krab seemed to listen. The chairs, the tables, even the old grill they all stood in, still attention, as if SpongeBob's quiet song was tucking them deeper into rest. He made his way to the counter, pausing to pick up a few crumbs of bun left from the day's rush. Each crumb looked like a tiny golden speck against the clean wood. He brushed them gently into his palm as though afraid of waking them, and dropped them into the trash with a soft pat. "Good night, little crumbs," he whispered. "You worked hard, too." From the dining area came a faint sound, a sleepy groan, followed by a snore. SpongeBob peeked around the counter and saw Squidward still slumped over, his head resting on his folded arms. His clarinet lay beside him, catching the moonlight. SpongeBob smiled. "Sleep tight, Squidward," he murmured. "Don't worry, I'll finish the cleanup." He tiptoed past, his square feet making soft thump-thump sounds on the floorboards. The mop glided behind him like a shadow. Every few moments he paused to look out the window where the sea moved like a blanket being pulled slowly over the sand. Tiny jellyfish pulsed in the distance, their glow fading and brightening in slow, even rhythm. SpongeBob watched them for a while, feeling his own heartbeat match their pace. Then he turned to the tables, his favorite part. Each one had its own little story from the day. Table 1, where Mr. Krabs had tested a new secret sauce. Table 6, where a family of anchovies had laughed so loudly their bubbles filled the air. Table 9, where he and Squidward had argued about napkin folding and then laughed about it when a customer used them to make a paper crown. SpongeBob traced a finger along Table 9's edge. The wood was smooth, polished from years of wiping and care. "You've seen it all," he said softly. "Every day, a little more happiness." He set down the mop and grabbed a small cloth from his apron pocket. One by one, he polished the tables, slow circles that caught the dim light and sent it spinning. The sound of the cloth against the wood was rhythmic and low. Wipe, wipe. Another heartbeat in the quiet. From the kitchen, the faucet dripped once plink, and then again plink. Each drop joined the rhythm of the night, small and patient. SpongeBob smiled at the sound. "No worries, Sink," he said. "I'll turn you off soon. Just finishing up your bedtime story first." He moved to the condiment station next, aligning every ketchup and mustard bottle until they stood perfectly straight, their labels facing forward. He gave each one a gentle pat. "Sleep well, my saucy friends." The mop water in the bucket had turned slightly cloudy now. SpongeBob knelt beside it, dipping the mop again. The ripples spread outward in soft waves, bumping against the edges before settling into stillness once more. He glanced toward the office. The door was half closed, and faint snores drifted through. Mr. Krabs was deep in his dreams, maybe chasing coins across some golden seafloor. SpongeBob giggled quietly. "He deserves that nap," he said to himself. "He works so hard." He continued mopping near the doorway, careful not to wake him. The wood creaked softly beneath his steps, like old planks sighing in relief. The faint sound of Mr. Krab's snoring mixed with Squidward's from the front, two slow, uneven rhythms that somehow blended into harmony. SpongeBob stopped for a moment and listened. The restaurant was alive, but calm breathing, dreaming, resting. He turned toward the kitchen again, where the air shimmered faintly in the lamplight. Steam still lingered in corners, twisting into slow ribbons that rose and disappeared. The spatulas gleamed like sleeping silverfish on the wall, and the grill's surface reflected the dim blue glow of the moon. SpongeBob sighed contentedly. "Almost done," he said. "Almost ready for your dreams, too." He dipped the mop one last time, and the water's gentle movement sounded like a whisper, a soft reminder that even cleaning could be part of the sea's lullaby. The Krusty Krab was quiet, but never lonely. It was the kind of silence that felt full of warmth, of stories, of everything that had ever happened inside its walls. SpongeBob smiled as he began the next section of his quiet ritual, humming again, slower this time, a melody as light as a drifting bubble. SpongeBob moved back into the kitchen, carrying his bucket like a lantern of water. The floor here felt cooler beneath his feet, and the faint hum of the freezer filled the air like a steady breath. He set the bucket down beside the stove, the gentle clink echoing softly before fading away. The grill sat quietly in the center of the room, the same grill that had sizzled and crackled all day long. Now it gleamed under the low light, slick with a thin shimmer of oil. SpongeBob ran a gloved hand over it, his fingers tracing the marks of 1,000 patties gone by. "Time to rest, old friend," he whispered. He reached for a sponge and began to scrub slow, circular motions that left faint streaks of foam behind. The sound was low and rhythmic, like waves brushing sand. Scrub, rinse, wipe. Each motion matched the quiet pulse of the sea outside. As he cleaned, little memories began to rise in his mind, the laughter of customers, the buzz of the fryer, the proud look on Mr. Krab's face after counting the day's last coin. SpongeBob smiled to himself. Every bit of the Krusty Krab had its own little heartbeat, its own memory waiting to hum again tomorrow. He lifted the grill cover slightly. The hinges made a soft creak, the kind that sounded almost like a yawn. "Good night, grill," SpongeBob said warmly. "You did your best today." Next came the fryer. He peeked inside, empty now, and the oil still faintly glowing from the warmth it held. It smelled of salt and potatoes, of meals shared and laughter still echoing in invisible trails. SpongeBob tilted the fryer gently, draining what little oil remained. The trickle made a plink, plink, plink sound, soft and delicate. When it was empty, he wiped the edges clean, careful to smooth out every last crumb. "Can't have you sleeping with crumbs," he murmured, smiling. "You deserve a tidy nap." The air grew even quieter. The sounds of Squidward's soft snores from the dining area were distant now, muffled by the kitchen walls. All SpongeBob could hear was the sound of his cloth brushing steel, and the faint, almost musical vibration of bubbles drifting past the window. He moved to the shelves next, where the spices rested in neat rows. Each label was slightly faded from years of use. Sea salt, kelp flakes, coral pepper, ocean paprika. He touched each jar lightly, dusting their tops with his fingertips. He whispered to them as he worked. "Thank you, kelp flakes. You made today's Krabby Patties extra special. And you, coral pepper spicy, but never too much. You know just how to shine." He chuckled softly to himself, the sound almost blending with the hum of the fridge. The refrigerator itself stood like a great sleeping guardian, humming low and constant. SpongeBob opened the door just enough to peek inside. The faint glow of the interior light spilled out a cold, silvery glow that touched his face. Inside, the ingredients were neatly stacked. Buns, lettuce, cheese, and a small note taped to the inside wall that read, "Don't forget tomorrow's delivery kelp burgers." SpongeBob smiled and closed it gently. "All ready for a new day," he said. Then, as he turned back, he noticed a small trail of bubbles floating upward from a sink full of soapy water. They rose lazily, twisting in the faint current before popping one by one with soft pfft sounds. SpongeBob stood for a moment watching them drift. "Looks like you're having fun," he said with a grin. Guess you're not tired yet. He picked up the last few dishes, only a handful left, glimmering faintly in the pale light. He dipped them into the warm, soapy water, the suds rising and hugging his hands like tiny clouds. The smell of lemon soap mixed with salt water filled the room. Swish, rinse, clink. The gentle rhythm continued, unhurried and peaceful. Each plate came out clean and shining, catching the reflection of the glowing window. SpongeBob placed them one by one on the rack, careful, balanced, perfectly lined up. The sound they made as they settled tink, tink, tink was soft, almost musical. As he finished, he leaned on the counter, taking a deep, satisfied breath. The whole kitchen sparkled now. The grill was spotless, the floor gleamed, and every jar and utensil seemed to rest easier in the calm. The only light came from the window, where the sea outside shimmered faintly tiny glimmers of bioluminescent life, pulsing like stars. The moonlight painted everything in shades of blue and silver. SpongeBob let his eyes follow the shapes in the water, soft silhouettes of drifting kelp, lazy jellyfish, and the faint glow of a snail shell tumbling in the current. He felt a warm sense of peace spread through him, a quiet pride that came not from big things, but from small ones done with care. The Krusty Krab wasn't just clean, it was ready to dream. He rinsed out the mop and emptied the bucket into the drain. The sound of the water rushing down was slow and soothing, fading into silence. When the last drop disappeared, SpongeBob set the mop back in its corner, the wooden handle leaning just right. He gave it a little pat on the side. "Good night, buddy," he said softly. "You always do your best work when no one's watching." Then he turned off the small kitchen lamp. The room dimmed, but didn't fall into darkness. The glow from the ocean still slipped through the windows, painting the walls in soft, moving light. SpongeBob stood for a moment longer, listening. The faint creaks of the Krusty Krab's old wooden beams, the hush of the sea, the tiny, distant snores of his friends. Everything was at peace. Everything was just right. And so, with a soft sigh, SpongeBob picked up a towel, draped it over his arm, and stepped toward the dining area again, ready to tuck the last parts of the Krusty Krab into their nightly rest. SpongeBob stepped softly back into the dining area, his towel folded neatly over his arm. The light was dimmer now, the coral moon having drifted behind a passing cloud. The glow from the jellyfish outside painted soft, shifting shapes on the walls, pale blues and lilacs that danced slowly, like the ocean itself was breathing. The stillness felt sacred. Even the air moved differently here, flowing in long, lazy waves through the open room. SpongeBob smiled as he walked between the tables, his feet making the faintest pat-pat on the freshly mopped floor. He stopped at the counter first. The register sat quietly, its buttons glinting in the faint light. A few stray coins rested beside it, today's forgotten change. SpongeBob gently swept them into his hand, the coins clinking softly like tiny bells. He placed them into the registered drawer and closed it slowly, careful not to let it snap. "There you go," he murmured. "All safe and sound." He wiped the counter next, his towel moving in calm, steady circles. Swish, wipe, swish, wipe. Each motion left a faint shine behind, like a trail of moonlight. He could almost see the reflections of the day, still lingering flashes of smiling faces, plates piled high, and the gentle chaos that filled every lunch hour. But now there was only peace. He leaned against the counter for a moment, looking across the room. The chairs stood stacked in neat rows, their legs forming tidy patterns of shadow across the floor. Each table gleamed faintly, the air around them thick with quiet. SpongeBob began to hum again the same melody he had hummed in the kitchen, slow and dreamy, as if the restaurant itself were listening. The sound filled the room like a lullaby, wrapping around the tables and drifting up to the ceiling beams where the hanging lanterns swayed gently in the tide. He walked to the far corner where the Employee of the Month wall hung. Each frame caught the faint light differently, shining softly where the glass was clean, glowing where it was just a little dusty. SpongeBob stopped in front of his favorite photo, his very first Employee of the Month picture. His smile in it was wide, bright, almost glowing. He chuckled quietly. "You were so nervous that day," he whispered to his reflection in the glass. "You dropped 2 buns before Mr. Krabs even took the photo." The memory made him smile wider, softer. He took his towel and polished the frame gently, tracing the edges with slow care. "There," he said. "Good as new." The room seemed to hum back at him, not a sound exactly, but a feeling, the kind of warmth that fills a space after a long, good day. SpongeBob felt it in his chest, that gentle ache of love for this place, for everything it meant. He moved to table 3 next, the one by the window. This was where he'd served his very first customer years ago. He ran his hand along the edge, remembering the sound of that first order, the excitement, the tiny mistakes, the laughter that had followed. Outside the window, a few bubbles drifted upward, catching light from the passing jellyfish. They shimmered and popped in slow motion. SpongeBob's eyes followed them for a while, his mind floating with them through the calm blue water. Then he picked up a chair and turned it upside down, setting it carefully on top of the table. The legs made a soft wooden tap as they met the polished surface. He moved slowly, stacking each chair in turn, humming under his breath all the while. Tap, hum, tap, hum. It was a quiet rhythm, steady and sleepy, echoing through the empty room. Each sound faded quickly into the soft air, replaced by silence that felt deeper with every passing minute. When all the chairs were stacked, SpongeBob took a few steps back and admired the scene. The Krusty Krab looked peaceful, like a photograph frozen in time. The walls glowed faintly blue, the shadows long and calm. The only movement came from the gentle sway of the sign outside the window, rocking back and forth in the lazy current. SpongeBob exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the window for a moment. He traced a tiny heart into the mist with his fingertip before it faded away. "Sleep tight, Krusty Krab," he whispered. The air smelled faintly of kelp and soap, a mix that somehow felt like home. SpongeBob turned off the overhead lamps one by one, each click soft and final. Click, click, click. Only one small lantern by the door remained, its light golden and warm, casting a soft circle on the floor. He left it on, just the way Mr. Krabs liked it. "A night light," he said with a small grin, "so the Krabby Patties don't get scared." He laughed quietly at his own joke, the sound melting into the gentle hum of the ocean outside. SpongeBob took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. His body felt heavy now in the best way, like the weight of the day had settled into something calm and peaceful. He looked around once more, his gaze drifting from the counter to the door, from the window to the glowing jellyfish outside. Everything felt right. Still, there was one last thing to do. He walked over to the broom closet in the back, opening it quietly. Inside were his cleaning tools, lined up neatly, waiting. The broom, the mop, the duster, each one in its proper place. SpongeBob smiled at them, proud and fond. "You all did great tonight," he said softly. "Now it's your turn to rest." He hung his towel on the little hook beside the door and gave one final glance around the room. The Krusty Krab was perfectly still now, a resting ship. floating in a gentle sea of blue. He placed his hand on the wall, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath his palm. "Good night, old friend," he whispered. "You did wonderfully today." And for a long, quiet moment, he just stood there still, breathing with the restaurant, the rhythm of the ocean echoing softly in the walls around him. The Krusty Krab was spotless now. Every surface gleamed softly beneath the last golden lantern. Every chair was stacked, every dish washed, every light but one turned low. The whole place felt like it had taken a deep breath and was now slowly, peacefully exhaling. SpongeBob stood in the middle of the dining room, his hands folded neatly in front of him. The hush was total now, no clatter, no chatter, no sizzling grill, just the faint whisper of the sea pressing against the windows, the slow pulse of the current sliding past the building. He tilted his head slightly and listened. The ocean had its own language. He thought soft, secret, endless. Tonight it spoke in lullabies. Each distant wave sounded like a sigh, each passing current like a quiet hum. SpongeBob smiled. "You sound sleepy too," he whispered to the sea. "Guess everyone's heading to bed." He turned toward the far wall where a small framed picture hung, one that most customers never noticed. It was of Mr. Krab, Squidward, and SpongeBob, all standing proudly in front of the Krusty Krab on its opening day. The photo was old, a little faded but warm. SpongeBob stepped closer. His younger self looked so excited, so full of bright energy. "You still feel like that," he murmured softly. "Every day." He reached up and adjusted the frame, making sure it was straight. Then he brushed a speck of dust from the glass and smiled at it once more before stepping back. A small sigh escaped him, not from tiredness, but from contentment. He walked toward the front doors, glancing outside. The water was calm and full of drifting light. Tiny fish glowed as they swam past, leaving thin trails that faded into the darkness. Beyond them, the dim silhouette of jellyfish fields shimmered faintly under the moon. SpongeBob pressed a hand against the glass. The coolness seeped into his palm. He thought of all the mornings he'd watched the sun rise over this same view, the first rays painting the sea gold, the Krusty Krab waking up again. But now, it was time for the opposite, not rising, but resting. Not waking, but dreaming. He turned and walked slowly back toward the kitchen door. Squidward's soft snores still came from the far booth, gentle, steady, like waves lapping against a rock. From Mr. Krab's office came the faint jingle of a coin rolling in his sleep. SpongeBob chuckled quietly. Guess he's counting money in his dreams. He passed each table one last time, running his fingertips across smooth, clean surfaces. The sensation was cool and comforting. He could almost feel the warmth they'd held earlier that day, the echoes of laughter, the clinking of plates, the joy that filled this little place. Now it was all tucked away, safe inside the silence. SpongeBob's steps slowed. His eyes grew softer. The lantern light flickered slightly, the golden glow swaying in the current. It made the shadows dance long and slow, like the gentle movement of seagrass. He moved to the door behind the counter, the one that led to the little employee room where he sometimes took short breaks. Inside it was simple. A bench, a tiny sink, and a clock whose hands barely made a sound as they ticked. SpongeBob set his cleaning apron on the hook beside the door and folded it carefully, smoothing the corners. The fabric still smelled faintly of soap and salt. "You did good today," he said softly, patting it once. He sat down on the bench, the cushion letting out a soft puff beneath his weight. He leaned back, his eyes half-lidded, and listened again the gentle hum of the ocean, the creaks of the wooden beams, the faint, dripping sound somewhere deep in the pipes. It was music in its own way, a lullaby that only the sea could play. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in slow. The air was cool and faintly sweet with the scent of kelp. Each breath felt like it belonged to the ocean, calm, measured, endless. After a while, he opened his eyes again. He didn't want to fall asleep just yet. There was one last thing to do, his favorite part of every night. He stood and padded quietly back to the main room, where the golden lantern still glowed by the door. He walked over to it, looking around one last time at the tables, the counter, the windows, the soft drift of jellyfish light. Everything was perfect. Everything was peaceful. SpongeBob reached out and touched the lantern gently. "Good night, Krusty Krab," he whispered. "Sweet dreams." And with a soft click, he turned it off. The room fell into a velvety blue darkness. Moonlight poured through the windows, silver and faint, tracing soft outlines of chairs and tables. The glow from the sea outside was enough to see by dim, gentle, endless. SpongeBob stood still, letting his eyes adjust. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of calm, of rest, of the quiet heartbeat of the ocean. He took one step back and whispered again, "See you in the morning." Then he turned toward the door, careful not to disturb Squidward or Mr. Krabs as he passed. He opened the front door just a little, letting the faintest stream of moonlit water drift through. It brushed against him like a cool breeze. He stepped outside, closing the door softly behind him. Through the window, he could still see the shapes of the chairs and tables, the soft glow of jellyfish moving past. The Krusty Krab looked peaceful, a quiet lighthouse in the sea, resting. SpongeBob smiled. His cleaning was done. His heart was full. He began the slow walk home toward his pineapple, each step light and unhurried. The sand beneath him puffed softly with each footstep. The ocean around him hummed its eternal song, deep and calm and kind. And behind him, the Krusty Krab stood still, wrapped in moonlight. Inside, the air was still warm from the day, full of soft dreams and the memory of laughter. SpongeBob glanced back one last time. The sign outside swayed gently, the letters glowing faintly in the silver light. "Sleep well," he whispered. Then he turned and walked on, the gentle sound of the sea guiding him home, each wave, each ripple, each quiet breath of water carrying the same simple rhythm. Shh, hush, rest, sleep. And the Krusty Krab, at last, drifted fully into its dreams. The Krusty Krab slept soundly under the quiet weight of the ocean night. The last bubbles of the evening drifted lazily upward, glowing faintly in the pale blue darkness. Inside, everything was still. The chairs were stacked neatly, the grills shined softly, and the faint scent of soap and sea salt hung in the air, SpongeBob's gentle handiwork. For a while, there was only the faint sound of the sea outside, whispering against the windows. But then, from behind the door of the office, came a small rustle, a quiet sniff followed by a drowsy mumble. Mr. Krab stirred in his chair. He'd fallen asleep over his desk again, surrounded by ledgers and half-counted stacks of shiny coins. A small puddle of drool glistened on the corner of a notebook where his head had rested. He blinked once, then twice, rubbing his eyes with his claws. The golden glow of the little desk lamp flickered across his shell, throwing soft shadows across the room. "Ah, what time is it?" he muttered, squinting at the clock on the wall. Its hands moved slowly, the smaller one buried deep in the night hours. "Well, butter my barnacles. Must have nodded off again." He straightened in his chair, joints creaking softly, and looked around. The office was filled with the familiar comfort of old things, sea charts, treasure maps, a framed photo of a younger Mr. Krabs shaking hands with a very confused customer. The smell of parchment and salt hung thick in the air. He reached for his ledger, the edges worn soft from years of use, and ran a claw gently down the page. The numbers stared back, tidy, balanced, complete. "Not bad, me boy," he murmured to himself. "Another fine day of honest earning." But as he leaned back, the faint creak of the floorboards caught his attention. A soft sound coming from somewhere just outside his office, a whisper of wood shifting under the sea's slow pressure. Mr. Krabs froze for a moment, listening. The silence stretched, nothing but the quiet hum of the ocean. Still, he knew his restaurant. He knew every sound it made, and that one, he thought, sounded different. He stood up slowly. The lamp on his desk flickered as he moved, the light glinting off his shell. "Probably just the walls settling," he said under his breath. "Ain't nothing to worry about." But even as he said it, he reached for his small brass lantern, one he kept by the door, and lit it carefully. The soft flame flickered inside, casting a warm circle of gold across the floor. The light made the shadows dance gently along the walls as Mr. Krabs stepped into the main room. The restaurant was still. The air was cool, touched with the lingering scent of soap and fry oil. The chairs sat in their neat stacks, gleaming faintly in the low light. Mr. Krabs' heavy boots made quiet thud, thud sounds on the wood. He walked slowly, turning the lantern this way and that. The light spilled over the counter, over the grill, over the clean tables. SpongeBob had so carefully polished. "Clean as a whistle," he whispered, his voice low and proud. "The lad does fine work, he does." He reached the counter and ran a claw along it, testing the surface. No grease, no crumbs, just smooth wood. He grinned. "Could eat me reflection off this, I could." The faintest hint of a chuckle escaped him, echoing softly in the still air. He moved toward the front window next. Outside, the ocean was deep and blue, scattered with drifting light. The Krusty Krab sign swayed lazily above the sand, creaking every few seconds. Mr. Krabs tapped a claw against the glass. The coolness of it seeped through his shell. "Aye," he said softly. "Sleep well, old beauty. You've earned it." He turned away, holding the lantern close as he made his way between the tables. The golden light brushed across the walls, over the photos and the framed menus. Each little flicker made the room feel alive, not awake, but breathing, dreaming. Every now and then he stopped to listen. The sound of the sea outside, the slow rhythm of bubbles rising, the faint groan of the building shifting with the tide. "Music," Mr. Krabs whispered, his tone softening. "The kind of tune you only hear when the world's asleep." He reached one of the tables and placed a claw gently on it. "Aye, how many happy bellies have ye seen today, eh?" he said with a chuckle. "And how many crabby patties have ye carried to their final glory?" He could almost hear it again, the chatter, the laughter, the clink of plates and coins. But it was distant now, fading into memory. The restaurant's day was over, replaced by quiet and rest. Mr. Krabs took another slow breath and looked around. The Krusty Krab wasn't just a restaurant to him. It was home, heart, and history. Every plank, every screw, every faint scratch in the counter told a story. He smiled, soft and proud. "She's a fine ship," he said. "Still sailing after all these years?" The lantern's light wavered, its flame flickering as if nodding in agreement. Mr. Krabs moved toward the register boat next the heart of his operation. The lantern's glow caught the gleam of the golden cash register, its metal polished to a shine that could rival treasure. He leaned forward slightly, brushing a speck of imaginary dust off the edge. "Still guarding the gold, eh, old girl?" he whispered. The register sat silent, but in his mind it purred. There was something comforting about the sight of it, that heavy, solid symbol of a day's honest work. He could almost hear the faint cha-ching of coins dropping in, the cheerful rhythm that marked the heartbeat of his days. Mr. Krabs smiled faintly and patted it once gently. "Sleep tight. You've earned your rest." He turned toward the wall behind it, the one covered with framed newspaper clippings and photos. In the lantern's soft glow, they shimmered faintly. "Krusty Krab wins best burger in Bikini Bottom. Local restaurant survives anchovy stampede. Owner declares record profits. Money never sleeps." Mr. Krabs chuckled softly at that last one. "Aye. Maybe I was wrong about that," he murmured, eyes softening. "Aye." He reached up to straighten one of the frames, a faded picture of him and SpongeBob standing side by side, beaming proudly behind the counter. SpongeBob's grin was impossibly wide, his hat slightly crooked, and Mr. Krabs himself looked just a little younger, his shell brighter, his eyes sharper. For a long moment he stared at that photo, the lantern flame reflected in the glass like a tiny, glowing coin. "You've done well, lad," he said quietly, voice thick with warmth. "Better than I ever dreamed." He moved on, his boots creaking softly against the wood. Each sound echoed gently through the empty room. There was something about these late hours that softened everything. The Krusty Krab felt less like a workplace and more like a living thing, breathing slowly, resting after a long day's toil. Mr. Krabs reached the corner by the condiment bar and stopped. A few salt shakers stood there like tiny soldiers, all lined up and gleaming from SpongeBob's earlier polish. He adjusted one slightly, just to keep the line perfect. "Aye, order in the ranks," he whispered with a grin. "Can't have ye slacking off while the captain's watching." The sound of the sea outside deepened, a slow pulse that filled the quiet. The windows trembled faintly as a lazy current drifted by, stirring up soft trails of sand. Mr. Krabs walked toward the back hallway, where the walls were hung with old ship wheels and ropes. The lantern's glow brushed over them, making the shadows look like moving waves. He paused at the supply closet door, gave it a small tap, and listened. Silence. He nodded in approval. "No freeloading jellyfish this time. Good." As he turned the corner, the faint metallic scent of oil reached his nose, the back room, where the grill and fryer slept. He pushed the door open carefully, stepping into the kitchen. It was spotless, gleaming from SpongeBob's late-night cleaning. The counters shimmered under the golden light, and the air smelled faintly of soap and leftover salt. Mr. Krabs stood still for a moment, taking it in. "Would you look at that?" he breathed softly. "Not a single fry crumb out of place. The lad's got the heart of a sailor and the soul of a sponge." He walked to the grill, setting his lantern down beside it. The metal surface reflected the flickering flame, making it look like it still burned with the day's energy. He ran a claw along the edge, smooth, clean, cold. Then he smiled. "You'll sizzle again come morning, old friend." The fryer baskets hung neatly, the spatulas rested in their places like sleeping tools of trade. The kitchen was peaceful, humming with quiet pride. Mr. Krabs leaned against the counter, exhaling a slow breath. For a moment, the sound of the sea outside mingled with the faint hum of the lantern's flame. "Aye," he said softly. "It's a good life." He looked toward the ceiling, lost in thought. His mind drifted backward to the early days, when the Krusty Krab was just a dream and a broken-down shack. He could see it clearly, the cracked walls, the empty seats, the doubt. And yet even then he'd felt something calling. "I remember the first night," he murmured. "Didn't even have me first dollar yet. Just me and the smell of fry grease and hope." He chuckled softly at the memory. "I slept on the floor that night, too. Right over there." He pointed toward the corner near the icebox. "Figured if I stayed close to me investment, maybe she'd have better luck." The lantern flame shimmered, as if laughing with him. Mr. Krabs looked around the kitchen again, the steel, the tile, the soft echo of memory. "Aye," he said with quiet pride. "We've come far, haven't we?" He picked up the lantern again and turned toward the hallway. His next stop was the one place he always saved for last at the office safe. He could already feel the faint excitement stirring in his chest, the familiar warmth that always came when he thought about his coins resting quietly in the dark. "Hold tight, me beauties," he whispered, smiling as he walked. "Captain Krabs is coming to check the treasure." The sound of his boots echoed softly through the hall, steady and rhythmic. Behind him, the Krusty Krab stood peaceful and still glowing faintly in the lantern light, like a ship adrift in a calm, endless sea. The gentle hum of the lantern's flame flickered against the walls as Mr. Krabs made his way down the narrow hallway. The sound of the sea outside was steady now, a slow, rhythmic current that rolled against the glass like a lullaby. He walked with care, each step deliberate. He knew every inch of this corridor, every squeaky floorboard, every faint scratch on the walls left by years of use. And at the very end, resting beneath a small wooden beam, was the door to his treasure room. The air felt a little cooler here, a little denser, as if it carried the weight of all the days and dreams he had poured into this place. He stopped before the door, setting his lantern down gently beside him. The light glowed against the brass handle, bringing out the faint engravings on its surface, a small anchor worn smooth by touch. Mr. Krabs placed one claw on the handle and smiled. "Evening, me beauty," he whispered. "Ready for your nightly inspection?" The door gave a faint creak as he opened it, the sound soft but full of familiarity. Inside, the room was dim lit only by the lantern's glow spilling across the floor. And there it was, his safe. It stood proudly against the far wall, large and solid, its metal body reflecting the faint light like a calm sea under moonlight. The edges gleamed faintly where his claws had polished them over the years. Mr. Krabs stepped closer, his expression softening into something between reverence and affection. "There ye are," he murmured. "Still standing guard, I see." He knelt slightly, running his claw across the cool surface. "Aye, sturdy as a day I bought you, worth every last shiny shell." The safe's lock gleamed faintly, its dial catching the lantern's light. Mr. Krabs leaned close and began to turn it slowly, the clicks echoing softly in the small room. Click, click, click. Each sound felt like a heartbeat. The rhythm was calm, methodical, comforting a sound that only he could truly love. When the final click came, he paused for a moment, as if savoring it, then pulled the handle gently. The door opened with a low hum, and the inside glowed faintly gold in the lantern's light. There, nestled neatly inside, were his treasures, stacks of glistening coins, each one polished to perfection. The light shimmered across them like sunlight on water. Mr. Krabs' face softened instantly. His whole body seemed to relax, as though the sight itself brought him peace. "Ah," he sighed. "Me little treasures, still safe and sound." He reached in carefully, scooping a few coins into his claw. They made the faintest tink sound as they brushed against each other, light, delicate, like the chime of tiny bells. He held them close to his ear for a moment, eyes half closed. "Hear that?" he whispered. "That's the sound of a good day's work. Music, it is. The sweetest tune under the sea." He let the coins slide slowly back into the pile, the soft metallic rustle filling the quiet air. Then he began to speak to them in that low, affectionate tone only he used on nights like this. "You've all done good today, me lads, out there serving your purpose, making change, bringing joy to hungry bellies. A fine service indeed." He chuckled softly to himself, shaking his head. "Some folks tuck their children in at night. I tuck in me earnings." The lantern's light flickered, catching on the smooth edges of the coins and sending golden ripples across the walls. He reached for one particular coin, resting at the top of a smaller pile. It was old, slightly tarnished, his very first earned dollar. He lifted it gently between his claws, his expression growing tender. "And there ye are," he murmured. "Old Faithful. Me first and finest." He traced its edges with care, as if handling something sacred. The faint engraving on its face had faded over the years, but to Mr. Krabs it was as sharp as the day he earned it. "You started it all, didn't you?" he said quietly. "From one coin came two, and from two came a sea of 'em." He chuckled under his breath, but there was softness in it, a kind of pride mixed with nostalgia. He placed the coin back carefully, giving it a small pat. "Rest easy, me dear. You've earned it." Then he sat back on his heels, simply gazing at the coins. The light shimmered and swayed over them, as if they were alive, breathing with the rhythm of the tide. "Funny thing," he mused, his voice almost a whisper now. "All the gold in the sea, and it's for this little pile that keeps me going. Not just for the shine, but for the stories behind it." He reached into the safe again, letting the coins slip through his claws. Every clink, every sparkle reminds me of the work, the crew, the laughs, the life. He smiled faintly, eyes soft with reflection. "Aye. They're not just me riches. They're me memories." The lantern flame wavered slightly, its golden glow now softer, gentler. The coins glistened, as if glowing from within, as if even they understood his words. Mr. Krabs sighed contentedly, leaning back against the wall. "Another day, another fortune well kept," he said. "Sleep tight, me beauties. I'll see ye at dawn." He reached forward, closed the safe door slowly, and turned the lock until it clicked softly into place. Then he sat there for a while longer, just listening to the faint hum of the sea, the whisper of the flame, and the deep, peaceful quiet that filled his beloved restaurant. Mr. Krabs sat for a long while in the dim room, the lantern light swaying gently beside him. The safe was locked again, but its quiet presence filled the air solid, reassuring, steady. He leaned back against the wall, claws resting loosely on his knees, and let the silence sink in. The restaurant had fallen into a kind of deeper stillness now, one that only came at the very edge of the night. Even the sea outside seemed to be dozing. For a few moments there was nothing, no sound, no movement. Only the soft, rhythmic thump of his heartbeat, slow and calm. He looked down at the lantern, watching the small flame dance. "You got a soft light, don't you?" he murmured. "Not like the sun, not like me neon sign, but steady, aye, that's all a sailor needs." The light flickered against his shell, casting golden shapes across the wall. The glow reminded him of something a long, distant night from many years ago when he was much younger and the world was still wide and uncertain. He could see it now as clearly as if it were yesterday. A small ship swaying gently on the open sea, the waves rolling black and endless beneath a starry sky. The salty wind, the creak of the mast, the sound of gulls faint and far away. And there he was, young Captain Krabs, no restaurant yet, no fame, no fortune, just a dream in his heart and an old compass in his claw. He smiled faintly. Aye, those were the days. He remembered counting his first real earnings, a handful of coins earned after selling supplies to a passing merchant ship. The feeling had been electric, pure. At first weight of coin in his claw, it wasn't greed, not then. It was hope. You wouldn't think it, he whispered. But I didn't chase gold for the shine of it. I chased it because it felt like something solid, something mine. He chuckled softly, his voice warm and low. And I've been counting ever since. The flame quivered, and the safe's shadow stretched long and soft across the floor. The restaurant groaned faintly in the shifting tide like an old ship turning in its sleep. Mr. Krabs' eyes grew distant again, soft and fond. He thought about the day he found the old building that would become the Krusty Krab, half sunk, falling apart, but with strong bones beneath the ruin. Everyone said I was daft, he said quietly. Said no one would ever eat a patty from a shack like that. He smiled. But I saw in her the same way I saw something in myself. All she needed was a bit of polish and a bit of faith. He looked toward the doorway where a faint blue light from the sea spilled across the floor. And now look at her. A proper vessel. Me finest ship. A soft, contented sigh escaped him. And me finest crew. His thoughts turned inevitably to SpongeBob. The lad's boundless energy, his endless joy for work, his way of seeing beauty in the smallest things. Mr. Krabs' eyes softened with a fatherly glint. He's a strange one, that Sponge, he said with a quiet chuckle. But by the sea, he's the best fry Cap could ask for. Never late, never lazy, and he cleans like he's polishing gold. He reached over, picking up one of the ledgers from beside him. The corners were worn, pages filled with numbers, earnings, sales, notes, scribbled in his old handwriting. He thumbed through them slowly, the sound of the paper soft and familiar. Funny thing, he murmured. I used to think these were the most important records I'd ever keep. But the real treasure's out there on the floor, in the work, the laughs, the folks that walk through that door. He smiled faintly. Aye, even Squidward. A low chuckle filled the room, echoing faintly before fading back into the stillness. Mr. Krabs rose slowly, his joints creaking just a little, and picked up his lantern. He looked around the small room one last time. All's well, he said softly. Safe and sound. Just the way I like it. He stepped back into the hallway, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded final but peaceful. The main dining room stretched out before him, wide, quiet, glowing faintly in the lantern's light. The empty tables, the tidy counters, the stillness. It was all his, yet it felt like something greater, something he was merely keeping watch over. He set the lantern down on the counter for a moment and turned to look at the restaurant as a whole. The silence wasn't empty. It was alive. He could feel the day that had passed still lingering in the air, the chatter, the sizzling, the laughter, and beneath it all, the rhythm of the sea, steady and eternal. Rest well, me Krusty Krab, he whispered. Tomorrow we start again. He gave a small, respectful nod to the walls, the tables, the grill, the air itself. Then he picked up the lantern and headed for his office once more. Inside, he set the lantern on the desk, dimming its flame. The light shrank to a tiny glow, warm and comforting. He sat down, leaned back in his chair, and folded his claws across his chest. The faint scent of salt and metal lingered in the air. His eyes drifted toward the old photo on the wall, him and SpongeBob smiling in the bright daylight. He smiled back. Outside, a soft current passed by the windows, brushing the sand gently against the glass. The sound was like a sigh, the ocean itself exhaling, settling into its own rest. Mr. Krabs closed his eyes, his breathing slow and deep. "Another good day," he murmured. "Another safe harbor." The flame flickered once, then steadied. The room fell into a hush, wrapped in gold and shadow. The captain was home. The ship was still. And the Krusty Krab slept on, safe beneath the quiet sea. Across the calm street from the Krusty Krab, the night had fully settled. The water was a deep blue velvet, undisturbed except for the lazy dance of tiny bubbles rising from the coral. All the lights in the Bikini Bottom were dim, all but one. A single window glowed faintly inside a modest Easter Island-shaped house. Behind the glass, the silhouette of Squidward tentacles moved slowly, pacing back and forth. Inside, his living room was bathed in a soft amber glow. A small lamp cast a pool of light across his wooden floor, catching the edge of a polished clarinet that rested carefully on the table. The rest of the house was still neat, quiet, arranged with Squidward's particular kind of order. He stood near the window, looking out toward the sleeping Krusty Krab. It sat there like a dark, gentle shape in the distance, its sign swung slightly in the soft current. Squidward muttered quietly to himself. Finally quiet for once. He sipped from a small cup of sea kelp tea, the steam curling slowly upward, then fading into the water. The cup made a faint clink as he set it down beside the clarinet. His eyelids drooped half-closed, not in boredom, but in the calm that came when the world stopped asking things of him. No customers, no orders shouted through a kitchen window, no SpongeBob bouncing through the walls with unstoppable cheer, just silence. He stood there for a while, letting it wash over him like warm tidewater. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, it was full of space and peace and the faint hum of the ocean itself. After a few minutes, he reached for his clarinet. His long fingers traced its smooth black surface, feeling the faint ridges of its keys. He smiled faintly, a small, private smile, the kind no one else ever saw. "You and me, old friend," he whispered. "Just like every night." He lifted it slowly, turning toward the open window. The soft current drifted in, carrying the faint scent of coral and sea foam. Outside, the ocean glowed faintly turquoise, where the moonlight filtered through. He took a deep breath, the kind that fills the chest and stills the mind, and then, gently, he played. The first note floated out like a sigh, long, low, and smooth. It curled through the water, expanding softly, shimmering as it went. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sea carried it farther than sound ever could on land. Squidward's eyes half closed as the melody began to take shape, slow, thoughtful, tender. Each note seemed to lean on the next, like soft footsteps across the ocean floor. The music wound its way through his house, slipping past the window and out into the open sea. It drifted across the sand, through the coral, and toward the Krusty Krab, a trail of sound as delicate as moonlight. Inside the darkened restaurant, the faintest echo touched the walls, a soft hum that mingled with the rhythm of the waves. The tables and chairs, the clean grill, even Mr. Krabs, sleeping in his office, all seemed to hum quietly in response, as if recognizing the familiar song. Back in his house, Squidward moved with the music. His tentacles shifted gently as he played, the clarinet swaying with him. The tune was calm and wistful, neither sad nor happy, but something beautifully in between. It was a melody without words, one he'd made up long ago and played countless nights since. He didn't play it for anyone. He never did. He played it because it filled the quiet with something gentle, something human. As the notes floated outward, his mind wandered. He thought of the day just past, the clatter of trays, the endless chatter, SpongeBob's unstoppable energy. He thought of how, in the noise, he often longed for silence. And now that silence was here, it felt like an old friend returning home. The next phrase of the melody rose a little higher, like a small glimmer of thought breaking the surface. The sound brushed against the window pane, echoing faintly, then rippled away. Outside, a small school of jellyfish drifted past, their translucent bodies glowing faint pink in the moonlight. For a moment they seemed to slow, turning slightly as though listening. Squidward's melody softened again, the sound of slow waves folding into themselves. His breathing fell into rhythm with it, calm and deep. Every so often, a note wavered a tiny imperfection, a quiver that made the music feel alive. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. He closed his eyes completely now, letting instinct guide him. The melody moved the way the sea did not in a straight line, but in soft circles. It was the sound of memory, of quiet evenings, of thoughts that never needed to be said aloud. And for the first time that day, maybe the first time in many days, Squidward felt content. He wasn't performing. He wasn't being watched. He was simply existing. The notes faded softer now, trailing off like bubbles rising to the surface, until the last one lingered in the water, trembling faintly before dissolving into the dark. Squidward lowered the clarinet slowly and exhaled. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what he'd just played. The house, the sea, even the Krusty Krab seemed to hum with the echo of his song. He set the clarinet down gently, smiling faintly to himself. That one, he murmured, wasn't half bad. The soft hush of the ocean lingered in Squidward's home after that final note faded. He stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, still holding the breath from his last exhale. It wasn't silence that surrounded him, it was peace. A calm so gentle, it almost had a texture, as if it could be touched. He looked toward the window again, watching how the moonlight painted faint stripes across his carpet. The water outside shimmered like rippled glass, and the quiet hum of the deep sea filled the air between notes. He took another slow breath and picked up his clarinet once more. The second song came naturally. It wasn't one he'd written, but one that seemed to rise up from memory itself. A soft waltz, delicate and wandering, with each phrase stretching and folding back like the tide. The first note left his clarinet like a sigh of relief. The next followed slightly higher, forming a gentle pattern that spiraled upward, then down again, a musical echo of his thoughts. As he played, he drifted, not just in sound, but in time. His mind went back to his younger days when he first fell in love with music. He remembered sitting on a rock near jellyfish fields, listening to the hum of the sea while practicing scales that never quite sounded right. He remembered the dream he'd carried then to perform before crowds who would listen, really listen. But as the years passed, the dream had quieted, replaced by routine and the low hum of daily life at the Krusty Krab. Still, these nights, this was when he felt like the world still understood him. He closed his eyes again, swaying gently to the rhythm. His tentacles moved gracefully now, no longer thinking about technique or perfection. The clarinet became a voice, his voice saying everything he never said out loud. The melody danced upward, filled with a wistful kind of hope. Then it softened, melting into warm, round tones that drifted through the window and out into the open sea. Outside, the sound brushed over coral reefs and sleeping seaweed forests. Tiny bubbles shimmered as they passed through it. Even the sand seemed to pulse faintly with the rhythm. At the Krusty Krab, a faint vibration ran through the sign above the door. Inside, the still air trembled just barely as the notes found their way in through unseen cracks. The wooden walls absorbed the music like a lullaby they'd heard before. In the kitchen, the pots and pans, freshly polished by SpongeBob earlier that night, glimmered softly into the moonlight. The tune passed over them like a whisper resonating in a faint, metallic hum. In his small office, Mr. Krabs stirred slightly in his chair, the edge of the melody brushing against his dreams. A smile tugged at his face. Something about the song reminded him of the sound of coins gently clinking together. And though he'd never admit it aloud, it was comforting. Back in his house, Squidward continued to play, unaware of how far his music traveled. Each note was like a word spoken softly into the sea, and the sea answered in kind the faint echo of water currents, the soft murmur of the deep. He felt lighter now. The tension in his shoulders had faded. His thoughts weren't sharp or restless anymore. He wasn't thinking about the Krusty Krab or SpongeBob or how the day had gone. He was simply moving with the melody, a quiet current of peace carrying him along. His music shifted tone from wistful to warm, from gentle longing to something closer to gratitude. Each note lingered a little longer, as if he didn't want it to end. He looked again toward the Krusty Krab, that familiar shape resting on the sand. He'd spent so many years resenting it, its noise, its chaos, its greasy smell. But tonight, under the soft glow of the moon, it looked different. It wasn't a burden, it was a landmark in his life, one constant thing in an ocean that was always changing. The thought softened him. His next notes carried that feeling, low, mellow, warm. The kind of sound that doesn't need to say thank you out loud, but somehow does. Outside, the music reached farther past the Krusty Krab, past the coral ridge until it brushed gently against SpongeBob's pineapple home. Inside, SpongeBob stirred slightly in his bed. Gary curled beside him. The faint melody drifted through the open window, soft as a dream. For a moment, SpongeBob's smile deepened in his sleep, and he turned over, murmuring something like, "Good night, Squidward." Squidward had no idea his music had reached him. He simply kept playing the way one might breathe when the world is perfectly still. He thought briefly of SpongeBob, his boundless energy, his constant laughter. He'd always claimed to find it annoying, but sometimes that laughter filled the quiet parts of the day. He'd never say it aloud, but the silence without it felt too quiet. The melody wove through that thought, gentle and understanding. The notes rose slightly, shimmering as they climbed toward the surface, then fell back down again, slower and slower. It felt like a conversation between him and the ocean, a back and forth of sound and silence. He played until the clock on his wall ticked quietly toward midnight. When the song ended, he didn't lower the clarinet right away. He just held it there, letting the silence that followed settle like soft sand around him. The room glowed faintly golden from the lamp, and in the distance he could hear the faint hum of the ocean carrying back the echoes of what he'd just played. He smiled again, a little more openly this time. There was something beautiful about playing for no one. Because maybe, in truth, he wasn't playing for no one. Maybe the sea itself was listening. The clarinet rested lightly in Squidward's hands, its body gleaming in the dim light. For a moment, he simply sat in the quiet that followed his last song. The world outside was utterly still, a silence so deep that even the hum of the sea seemed to hold its breath. He tilted his head, listening. Somewhere in that quiet, the faintest rhythm pulsed not from him, not from the clarinet, but from the ocean itself, a slow, steady thrum, like a heartbeat beneath the waves. He inhaled gently, the motion almost unnoticeable, and lifted the clarinet once more. This time he didn't plan what to play. He didn't reach for a familiar tune or a practice piece. He simply followed that rhythm, that deep, ancient pulse of the sea. The first note was soft, lower than before, resonant and smooth. It rolled outward, then folded back like a wave curling against the shore. The next note joined it, slightly higher, shimmering like light on water. Then another and another, a sequence that felt both spontaneous and eternal. This wasn't a song anymore. It was a conversation. Each phrase seemed to echo something natural, the gentle sway of seagrass, the hush of currents brushing past coral, the deep creak of distant tides shifting miles away. Squidward's eyes softened as he played. He didn't think, he didn't try, the music moved through him. It wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the water. Outside, the ocean began to glow faintly, not from any light source, but from the movement of plankton drifting through the sea, their tiny bodies flickering in rhythm with his song. Each note sent a small shimmer rippling through the water, creating waves of gentle luminescence that flowed outward from his house. The Krusty Krab glowed faintly in that light, as if bathed in moonlit mist. Its sign swayed gently, creaking in soft time with the melody. Inside, every object seemed to hum quietly in harmony, the cash register, the fryer, the spatula on the wall. Even the old wooden floorboards vibrated faintly, resonating with the calm frequency of the song. It was as though the restaurant itself were remembering something in its long days, the laughter that filled it, the scent of frying patties and the warmth of companionship. Now, in the deep quiet of night, it was being sung to sleep. Back in his house, Squidward sat straighter now, his tentacles moving slowly and deliberately. The music flowed in long, patient arcs, rising like the surface of the sea, then folding into calm descents. He was no longer playing for himself. He was playing with something larger, something vast and kind and ageless. He thought vaguely of all the sounds that filled his days, the chatter, the shouting, the endless repetition of orders. But in the silence of the night, the world finally made sense. Every noise had faded, and what remained was the pure tone of being one long, unbroken note stretching through time. He smiled faintly through the mouthpiece, the corners of his eyes relaxing. His mind wasn't on fame or audiences now. It wasn't even on perfection. He thought instead of feeling of how the sound spread through the water and became part of the world around him. How every creature, even those asleep in the sand, could somehow feel the vibration pass over them, like a soft blanket of sound. The music grew quieter, as though afraid to disturb the stillness it created. It became more fragile single notes, long and tender, spaced apart like gentle thoughts. Outside, a pair of sea snails glided slowly across the sand, leaving faint, glowing trails. A group of jellyfish floated closer, drawn by the sound. Their bodies pulsed in time with the rhythm, casting soft lavender light into the night. The entire scene looked dreamlike now, a small underwater world breathing in time with one musician's heart. Squidward opened his eyes again and saw the light outside his window. It shimmered faintly with each note, as though the ocean were responding in kind. He let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, not tired, just gentle amusement at the thought that his music had found an audience after all. Finally, he whispered softly between breaths, "An audience that listens." He continued playing, but slower now, his body swaying just slightly. The air in his home was filled with low vibration, that soft hum that lives between silence and sound. The walls seemed to breathe with it, and the lamp's glow trembled gently, matching the rhythm. He played a melody of descending notes, soft, deep, fading. Each one seemed to fall deeper into the sea, like pebbles dropped into a still pool. When they reached the bottom, the water rippled outward again, shimmering with 1,000 reflections of light. Out there, somewhere between the Krusty Krab and SpongeBob's home, the currents carried the music farther to Patrick's Rock, to the quiet caves of Jellyfish Fields, even to the edge of Goo Lagoon where the waves slept against the shore. Everywhere it touched, something shifted. The ocean seemed to sigh, the sand settled, and the gentle glow of the sea grew a little brighter. Squidward's melody was now part of the night, woven into it so completely that the two could not be told apart. He played until the lines between himself, his music, and the sea had all blurred into one. When he finally paused again, it was as if the world exhaled with him. Tiny bubbles rose from his clarinet, drifting upward in silence, catching faint bits of moonlight as they went. He didn't move for a long while after that. He just sat, listening to the faint echoes, watching how the light outside continued to flicker in rhythm with what he'd played, as though the sea wasn't ready to let it end. For a long time, Squidward didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his clarinet resting loosely in his hands, his gaze fixed on the glowing water outside his window. It felt like the world had become one slow breath in and out, everything pulsing softly together. The jellyfish outside continued to drift, their lights dimming and brightening like the rhythm of sleep. Tiny plankton shimmered in the current, catching traces of the melody that still lingered in the sea. Even the faint current through his open window seemed to move in time, tugging gently at the curtains before retreating again. He finally lowered the clarinet to his lap, exhaling a long, slow breath that almost sounded like a note itself. The air, or what passed for it underwater, felt warm and alive. The last echoes of his music clung to the edges of the room, vibrating faintly like invisible threads. He leaned back in his chair, letting the wooden frame creak softly beneath him. His eyes half closed, heavy but peaceful. For the first time in what felt like forever, his mind wasn't chasing thoughts, not about work, not about noise, not about lost dreams. It was quiet, completely quiet. He looked toward the Krusty Krab again through the window. From this angle, it looked almost gentle, its curved roof like a sleeping whale on the sand, its windows seeing the glow of the sea. A soft smile touched his face. He'd never thought of it as beautiful before, but maybe it always had been. He reached up, tapping his clarinet gently with one finger. A single bubble escaped the bell and floated upward, twisting lazily before vanishing into the blue. Then, almost without thinking, he lifted the instrument again. Not to play a full melody this time, just a few soft, slow notes, barely whispers of sound like words spoken in sleep. Each one carried something different, a thought, a memory, a quiet truth. The first was gratitude for the calm, for the stillness, for the quiet hours that belonged only to him. The second was nostalgia for his younger self, for the hope he once held, for the dream that still flickered quietly somewhere inside. And the last note, it was forgiveness. For himself. For everything that hadn't gone as planned. For the small frustrations of the days. For the noise he often mistook for chaos when, really, it was life itself. That final note lingered longer than it should have. It vibrated through the water, soft but unbreakable, until it brushed against everything in its path. The Krusty Krab sign gave a soft creak in reply. Inside, the fryer let out a faint metallic hum, like it was sighing in its sleep. Mr. Krabs stirred once more in his chair, mumbling something about meat treasure, before drifting back into deeper rest. Farther away, SpongeBob rolled over again, his blanket slipping slightly from his arm. The last note of Squidward's song drifted through the crack in his window, brushing gently against his dreams. And somewhere in those dreams he smiled. Outside, the current shifted, carrying that soft vibration farther still into the coral fields, over the dunes of sand, past Patrick's sleeping rock, and out toward the edge of the sea, where the light began to fade into the deep. The note finally dissolved, but the calm it brought remained. Inside his home, Squidward rested the clarinet on his knees. The light from the lamp flickered once, then steadied a warm, golden circle surrounding him. His eyelids grew heavier by the minute. He looked at his instrument one last time and whispered, "Good night, old friend." He placed it gently on the stand beside him. The metal keys glinted faintly as they caught the light, before the glow of the lamp dimmed further. The room filled with soft shadows, the kind that don't hide anything, they just rest. Squidward shifted in his chair, adjusting the pillow behind him. Outside, the water continued to move slowly, pulling faint streams of sand into drifting patterns. The jellyfish had floated away now, their faint light fading into the distance. All that was left was the rhythm of the sea and the quiet of a musician at peace. He let his eyes close, and the stillness grew even deeper. No thoughts pressed in. No memories lingered too long. Just the faint pulse of the ocean, slow, calm, endless. The clarinet gleamed faintly beside him, its surface reflecting the last bits of moonlight filtering through the window. Every so often, a bubble drifted upward from somewhere unseen, catching the glow before disappearing. Squidward's breathing slowed, in and out, in and out. The chair creaked softly beneath him as his body relaxed completely. If you listened closely, the sound of his breathing almost matched the rhythm of the sea itself, two patterns blending until they became one. Minutes passed, then hours. The light in the house dimmed until it was nothing more than a faint glimmer behind the window. Outside, the ocean remained still, the current slow, the sand undisturbed, the Krusty Krab silent and resting. And yet, if someone had swum by just then, they might have sworn they could hear something, a faint hum beneath the silence. The ghost of a melody that wasn't gone, only sleeping. The kind of tune that doesn't fade, but folds itself quietly into the world around it. The sea carried that hum onward, tucking it into its depths like a secret lullaby. It moved gently through the night, brushing over coral, whispering across shells, finding every corner of Bikini Bottom where dreams were still being dreamt. And somewhere, deep beneath it all, Squidward's music lived on, not loud, not grand, but soft, endless, and peaceful. The kind of music that doesn't ask to be heard, only to be felt. In the quietest hour before dawn, the ocean settled completely. Not a current stirred, not a sound remained, only the calm. The Krusty Krab slept. SpongeBob slept. Patrick, Mr. Krabs, and even the smallest sea creatures, all were still. And in the window of that stone house, the faintest light glowed once more, a last reflection of the moon passing overhead. Then it too dimmed, and the sea went still. It was midnight's final breath, the music of peace itself. The ocean was still, completely, deeply still. Above the sand, the Krusty Krab sat quietly, a simple, sturdy shape against the faint shimmer of the moonlit sea. No bubbles rose from its roof now. No glow spilled from its windows. The restaurant that had once been filled with clatter, laughter, and sizzling sound now rested, like a great ship settled in the calmest waters. The sign above the door swayed gently with the current, the faintest creak marking the rhythm of the sea. Every few minutes a bubble escaped from somewhere unseen, rising slowly, twisting lazily toward the distant surface. Inside, the world had gone still. The tables stood in their perfect rows, their edges gleaming faintly where SpongeBob's sponge-soft polish had left the wood smooth as coral. Each chair was tucked in neatly, each condiment bottle lined up just so, as if the entire restaurant had taken a long, slow breath and finally exhaled. Near the grill, the faint reflection of the moon shimmered in a pan. The spatula rested in its stand, cool and motionless now, its metal edge catching one last trace of blue light. The counters spotless, the floors gleaming. Not a grain of sand or crumb of coral bun in sight. The kitchen hummed faintly with the low tone of resting machines, a quiet chorus of peace. It wasn't silence exactly. It was the sound of stillness, the quiet rhythm that fills a place when everything living has gone to rest. But the memory of motion still lingers. A soft current passed through the open porthole near the ceiling, stirring the hanging utensils just enough to make them chime faintly like tiny bells ringing somewhere far away. Then even that sound faded, absorbed by the deep calm that wrapped around the restaurant. In the office, Mr. Krabs was asleep at his desk. The ledger beneath his claw was still open, a pencil resting across its pages. The faintest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he dreamed. If one could peek inside his dreams, they'd find him, walking along an endless golden shore of treasure, the coins gently clinking, the ocean behind him whispering in lullaby. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, but even it seemed reluctant to disturb the peace. Its hands moved so slowly it was as if time itself were resting. Beyond the office door, the dining room stretched in quiet splendor. The hanging lamps swayed ever so slightly with the current, casting moving shadows across the walls like ripples of moonlight playing in the shallows. At one table, a napkin folded by SpongeBob earlier fluttered faintly in the soft current before settling again, perfectly still. A small trail of bubbles escaped from under one of the booths, drifting lazily upward. They shimmered in the dim light, turning pale silver before disappearing. Somewhere in the distance, a low, resonant hum reached the restaurant, the final echo of Squidward's midnight music. It was almost gone now, reduced to a faint vibration that seemed to live in the walls themselves. But if you listened closely, you could still feel it, that soft frequency of calm that kept everything in perfect rhythm. The Krusty Krab wasn't empty tonight. It wasn't alone. The sea had filled it with something unseen, a kind of presence, gentle and vast. The stillness wasn't hollow, it was full of memory. The tables remembered laughter. The grill remembered the scent of sizzling patties. The cash register remembered the sound of coins and the steady rhythm of Mr. Krab's chuckle. Every plank, every nail, every glass window pane carried a faint echo of the lives that passed through it. Now those memories rested too asleep like everything else. Outside, a small cloud of sand drifted across the seabed, carried by the gentlest of currents. It brushed against the restaurant's outer wall, swirling softly before settling once again. The entire ocean seemed to move slower now, as though aware that something sacred was happening. The Krusty Krab was dreaming. If buildings could dream, theirs would be quiet ones. Dreams of morning light pouring through the front door, of SpongeBob's laugh echoing off the walls, of Squidward's sigh at the register, of Mr. Krab's delighted cry at the sound of a sale. But tonight, those sounds existed only as faint ripples in the quiet sea of memory. The ocean wrapped around the restaurant like a blanket. Every plank of wood, every screw and nail, every bottle of ketchup and mustard glowed faintly in the blue. It wasn't light from outside, it was light from within, a soft inner warmth that lingered from the day's life and love. Inside the kitchen, a single drop of oil floated up from the grill, catching the faint gleam of moonlight as it rose. It shimmered, then disappeared, leaving nothing but still water and air. And then, once again, stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels alive, breathing quietly, resting peacefully, waiting for dawn. Somewhere between silence and dream, the Krusty Krab floated half awake, half asleep. The walls seemed to sigh softly as the water drifted through them. The sea had a way of breathing that no one ever quite noticed. It moved like air, slow and rhythmic, brushing against the windows, sweeping through the rafters, whispering through cracks in the old wood. The sound it made wasn't noise at all, more like a low lullaby, sung by the ocean itself. Outside, the faint gleam of plankton drifted by, glowing in patterns that rippled across the sand. Each one shimmered for a heartbeat, then vanished into the dark. They looked like stars wandering beneath the wave, stars that had forgotten the sky but found a new home in the sea. Those little flickers of light found their way through the Krusty Krab's glass windows, scattering across the tables and chairs. For a moment, it looked as though the whole restaurant was sprinkled with starlight. The ketchup bottles glowed faintly. The napkin holders reflected tiny constellations. Even the grill, cold and still, shimmered with silver specks that drifted and faded with the current. If anyone had been awake to see it, they might have thought the restaurant was breathing light in, light out, slow and calm. In the corner booth where SpongeBob and Patrick sometimes shared their breaks, a tiny bubble drifted up from beneath the seat cushion. It rose, spun gently in the current, and hovered mid-air for a moment before popping silently. Oh, inside that bubble, for the briefest instant, was the reflection of the entire Krusty Krab, perfect, whole, and glowing softly. And then, nothing but calm again. The clock above the counter ticked once more, then again. But each tick seemed slower now, stretched by the weight of stillness. Time had loosened its hold, letting the moments float free. Behind the counter, the register let out a small, sleepy ding. It wasn't a malfunction, more like a sigh. The sound echoed faintly, bouncing off the walls before fading into the water. Maybe in its own way, even the register dreamed of the day's clamor, of customers' laughter, of coins sliding down its chute, of Mr. Krab's gleeful chuckle. Back in the kitchen, a faint ripple stirred the hanging utensils. They swayed like chimes in a distant breeze, ringing soft, metallic notes that filled the air with gentle rhythm. Tink, tink, tink. Each sound faded slower than the last, like stars fading before dawn. Above the grill, a small streak of light passed by the window, a glowing jellyfish, moving silently through the blue. It pulsed with steady rhythm, every glow in sync with the ocean's heartbeat. As it passed, the room filled with a dim, shifting hue, from blue to violet to pale rose. The colors painted the walls in soft gradients, as if the Krusty Krab were being wrapped in a living blanket of light. The jellyfish drifted closer to the glass, hovering there as though peeking inside. Its tendrils waved gently, glowing faintly gold at their tips. Then, as if satisfied that everything inside was safe and still, it moved on, vanishing into the deep, like a dream fading upon waking. The faint light it left behind lingered for a moment. The grill shimmered. The floor reflected soft lavender tones. And then the color dissolved, returning everything to moonlit calm. Tower. If you listened closely, you could hear the faintest pulse, not a sound exactly, but a feeling like the heartbeat of the restaurant itself. Slow, even, peaceful. The Krusty Krab was resting now, completely. Outside, the sand had settled. The coral nearby swayed gently, their branches brushing each other like sleepy whispers. A snail drifted by, shell gleaming faintly under the moonlight, leaving a winding trail of soft bubbles in its wake. Even the sea seemed to dim. The current slowed. The light faded to a tender shade of midnight blue, the color of rest, the color of dreams. Inside, everything felt weightless. The chairs, the tables, even the walls themselves seemed to float in the water's cradle. No movement, no noise, just the quiet hum of life asleep. And within that quiet, the day's memories began to soften, melting into the water like gentle ripples. The sound of SpongeBob humming while he scrubbed the grill, the laughter of customers echoing off the glass, the faint clink of coins sliding into the register, Squidward's clarinet sighing through the dining room, Mr. Krab's low chuckle as he closed the day's ledger. Each sound drifted upward, mingling with the water, until all that remained was a soft, shimmering memory light moving through stillness. The Krusty Krab had seen many nights, but this one felt different, deeper, more peaceful, as though the sea itself had decided to tuck it in, whispering softly, "Sleep now. You worked hard enough." And the restaurant obeyed. Every board, every nail, every window pane eased into rest. Even the neon sign outside dimmed completely, its glow fading to nothing, until it became just a dark shape against the vast blue. Nothing stirred. Nothing needed to. The ocean had taken over the lullaby. If a place could dream, the Krusty Krab was dreaming now. It dreamed in slow colors, gold and coral and gentle blue. It dreamed in faint sounds, echoes of laughter, soft bubbling oil, the musical rhythm of plates being stacked and unstacked. These weren't sharp memories anymore. They were softened, like light seen through water. In the dream, the restaurant wasn't empty. It was alive again, but differently, quieter, sweeter, more like a memory retold by the sea itself. The doors creaked open, and a faint golden light poured in. It wasn't the harsh glow of morning, nor the flicker of lamps. It was something in between, warm and slow, glowing like the inside of a seashell. SpongeBob appeared first, not walking, not rushing, just drifting. He floated through the door, smiling gently, his arms outstretched as if greeting an old friend. His hat rested perfectly on his head, and his spatula gleamed faintly in his hand. But there was no hurry now, no sizzling grill waiting. He simply looked around, his wide eyes calm and content. "Morning already?" his voice asked softly, though no real sound came out. Only the thought of his voice lingered, blending with the hum of the ocean. Behind him, Squidward appeared, his clarinet cradled under one arm, his eyelids half lowered as always. But even his usual frown was gone. He looked peaceful, like someone finally allowed to rest. He walked or floated past SpongeBob without a word, making his way to the counter where his register sat, quiet and waiting. He tapped it lightly, ding. The sound echoed softly, and instead of annoyance, Squidward smiled faintly, like he'd just remembered something nice from long ago. Then came Mr. Krabs, moving slower than usual, as though the water itself had thickened around him. His shell gleamed faintly red in the golden light. He didn't rush to the register, didn't count his coins. He simply looked around the room, the tables, the grill, the walls, and nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "Aye," he said in that deep, gravelly tone the sea seemed to carry for him. "She's a fine place, she is." The Krusty Krab seemed to hum in response, its wooden frame creaking like an old ship answering back. All three of them, SpongeBob, Squidward, and Mr. Krab, stood there for a moment in silence. There was no rush to cook, no orders to take, no money to count. Just presence. It was as if the restaurant itself had summoned them, not as workers, but as memories, the heartbeats that kept its spirit alive. From the corners of the room, faint bubbles began to rise. They floated upward, carrying soft, glowing reflections within them, scenes from days long gone. In one bubble, SpongeBob flipped a perfect Krabby Patty, steam curling into the air like a ribbon. In another, Squidward rolled his eyes as SpongeBob laughed too loudly. In another still, Mr. Krabs clutched a shining coin, eyes twinkling. Each bubble drifted upward, burst silently, and disappeared into light. It was the restaurant remembering its happiest moments, replaying them softly before sleep. The dream deepened. Outside, the ocean glowed faintly gold, as though dawn were rising, but it wasn't real dawn. It was the Krusty Krab imagining one. The thought of light was enough to fill the sea with warmth. Tiny fish swam past the windows, their scales glinting like sunlight through waves. They moved slowly in no rush, drifting in the same gentle rhythm that filled the water. It was as if even they sensed the peace here, as though the Krusty Krab had become part of the sea's slow heartbeat. Inside, the light continued to shift, touching everything it passed: the counters, the grill, the napkin holders, turning them into little islands of gold. The register gleamed softly. The clock ticked once, then paused again. Everything existed between one breath and the next. And in that breath, the Krusty Krab remembered something older still the day it was built. The hammering of nails, the smell of fresh wood, the first time the sign was hung above the door. It remembered the excitement, the hope, the laughter that followed. Those memories rose like sand stirred from the ocean floor, glowing briefly before sinking back into the stillness. The dream felt endless yet soft, like being suspended in a warm current that carried nothing but calm. No sharp edges, no coldness, just rest. And somewhere deep in the restaurant's wooden bones, something pulsed the quiet rhythm of life, faint but steady. It wasn't the hum of machines nor the tick of the clock. It was the slow, peaceful beat of contentment. Everything was as it should be. The restaurant didn't need to serve or shine or shout. It only needed to be. The sea outside shifted again, darker now, indigo, fading to deep blue. The dream would soon fade. But not yet. For now, the Krusty Krab continued to drift between memory and sleep, its doors closed, its lights dimmed, its heart quietly glowing beneath the calm weight of the sea. The Krusty Krab's dream began to thin, not ending, just softening, like fog lifting from quiet water. The golden light faded, replaced by the deep, endless blue of night's final hour. The glow on the tables dimmed until they were only shadows of themselves, their outlines blurred by the sea's slow rhythm. The air, or rather, the water had grown cooler, gentler. It carried that still, drowsy calm that comes only before the very first hint of dawn. The restaurant seemed to settle deeper, as though tucking itself under the blankets of the sea. SpongeBob's dream self drifted toward the grill once more. He looked at it for a long time, the way someone might look at an old friend who's about to fall asleep. His eyes softened. His spatula glimmered faintly one last time, then faded from his hand as if the dream no longer needed it. "Good night, old buddy," he whispered to the grill, voice made of thought and water. Then he turned and smiled at the quiet kitchen. Every counter gleamed, every corner was clean, every plate stacked perfectly. He nodded once, satisfied as if he were tucking the Krusty Krab in too. Squidward stood by the counter, clarinet in hand. He raised it to his mouth but didn't play. Instead, he closed his eyes, and the faint sound of music rose without a single note, being blown the music of memory itself. It was slow, graceful, tender. A soundless song the ocean understood. The clarinet shimmered faintly before dissolving into the current, leaving behind only a trail of soft bubbles that glowed like stars for a few seconds, then vanished. Mr. Krabs watched them both, his broad chest rising with a long, contented sigh. He turned toward the register, his most faithful companion through the years. He gave it a small pat, his claw leaving a soft imprint of light on its lid. "Sleep well, me precious," he murmured. The register answered with a single, faint ding, the quietest one it had ever made. It wasn't loud, nor sharp, just a soft, sleepy sound, like a whisper. Then it, too, grew still. The three of them, SpongeBob, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs, stood together for a moment in the blue stillness, surrounded by the slow drift of light. No words were needed. The restaurant glowed faintly around them, as though breathing. Then one by one they faded. SpongeBob first, his smile lingering a moment longer before melting into soft bubbles. Then Squidward, his silhouette stretching thin as music, before vanishing completely. And finally Mr. Krabs, his outline flickering like an ember, before the sea carried it away. Their presence didn't disappear, though. It simply became part of the Krusty Krab part of the wood, the walls, the air. The place remembered them, even as it slept. Now only the building remained. Silent still. The dream had ended, but the peace continued. Outside, the ocean shifted ever so slightly. A faint current passed by, stirring the sand. The horizon began to glow, not with light yet, but with the idea of light. The first signal of morning whispered through the water, gentle and slow. It brushed against the Krusty Krab's walls like a kind hand. The old wood sighed softly in response, creaking once before resting still again. A few plankton drifted past, pulsing with pale light. Tiny fish glimmered like sparks, darting quietly in the distance. Everything was slow, tender, and peaceful, the world preparing to wake, but not yet ready to. Inside, the faint hum of the sea filled every space. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like a soft heartbeat. The kind of sound that makes the world feel alive, even when it's asleep. A single ray of early light reached through the water, touching the restaurant's sign. The letters shimmered faintly, KRUSTYKRAB, each one outlined in gold before fading back into shadow. The sea held its breath. For a long, timeless moment, the Krusty Krab seemed suspended between dream and day, not awake, not asleep, just being. The ocean's light grew a little brighter. The deep blues softened to pale turquoise. The faint outline of jellyfish fields shimmered in the far distance. The Krusty Krab's windows caught the first glimmer of light. It was soft, filtered, drowsy, not the full brightness of day, but the gentle beginning of it. Inside, the tables began to glow faintly again. The chairs gleamed where the light touched them. The floor reflected a single, wavy pattern of gold. It looked like the restaurant was smiling. The old clock on the wall ticked once, just once, then stopped again as if it, too, was choosing to rest a little longer before the morning came. Outside, the sand sparkled. The coral branches waved slowly in the current, their tips glimmering with the first kiss of dawn. And through it all, the Krusty Krab remained perfectly still, not in silence, but in peace. The world hadn't fully woken yet. SpongeBob would rise soon. The grill would sizzle again. The laughter, the chatter, the life, all of it would return. But for now, the restaurant stayed in that precious in-between, that soft golden edge of night. It didn't rush. It didn't stir. It simply rested. And as the ocean began to glow with the first warmth of morning, a final whisper moved through the sea, wrapping around the Krusty Krab like a lullaby's last note. Sleep well, old friend. The bubbles rose. The light spread. The Krusty Krab slept on calm, quiet, and deeply at peace. The sea watched over it, and the day waited patiently to begin.